Good evening, everyone. This is Wade Fransson, and we're back with Created in the Image of God, Exploring the Role of Religion in Society. I'm here with Jafar Falahi tonight. He's a documentary filmmaker, good friend. We've known each other for some time, had many discussions. We're hopefully soon to be joined by our regular guest, Daniel Sanderson from British Columbia. He's a couple of hours behind us in terms of timeline, and it's sometimes challenging for him to get here right on time in the studio. But we've had a number of conversations, Daniel and I, going back to the launch of this new live stream, July 3rd, I believe it was, the July 4th weekend. We've gone through various topics, including the role of Greek thought and Plato and the political dialogue, the structure of our civilization. We've also talked about the basis of economics, biblically speaking, from the book of Leviticus and the model that Moses implemented in ancient Israel, and how that relates to the current modern economic challenges that we face as a species. Tonight we're going to go in a different direction, but we will circle back and wrap this into the ongoing discussions. And, if you stick with us tonight, I think it will be richly rewarding to you in terms of understanding the basis of our society, the role that America and the American project, the American experiment plays in world civilization today, and what is emerging on the global scene in terms of the political challenges that this nation is facing as we emerge into a global society with a variety of influences. We talked about economics. Well, there's the communist model that was that played out in a number of nations going back 100 and more years ago. We've got socialism, we've got American-style capitalism, and there is a literal swirl of ideas as to where the world should go next and how we should manage our evolution as a species, how we should manage a global population that has exceeded 7 billion people and projections to go to 11 billion, how we should manage the allocation of resources across nations, across continents, across socioeconomic classes. There are so many issues and challenges facing us as a species. What we're doing here on this program is discussing a divine perspective that, as the first chapters of the Bible and the book of Genesis reveal, we were created in the image of God with latent capabilities that are divine in nature, the ability to create our own reality, our own society. These things were given to us according to the book of Genesis. What are we doing with them? How are we applying them to the challenges faced in modern society? What does the Bible and Revelation continue to reveal from that point? What about revelations that have been believed to have been delivered by other religions, whether it be Islam or Buddhism? How does all this play in? What about the multicultural religious society in India that doesn't just have freedom of religion, but has various religions integrated into the fabric of their society? These are all big questions facing us, and we're not afraid to tackle them, not because we believe we have all the answers, but because we believe that by openly addressing them from a variety of perspectives and bringing in unique and different perspectives to honestly and openly address these questions is the path forward. So, having given that introduction to what this show is all about, Jafar, I'd like to just invite you to just give a brief introduction to our audience of who you are, what you've been up to over the last few years, what your interest is in these topics, and frankly, why you're willing to join the show tonight based on what we've decided we're going to talk about, which is the role of America in particular in global religious freedom, historically and today, with an article that we'll talk about.
Yeah, I grew up on the West Coast, and I grew up in kind of a religious family, but I didn't have, so I'm not used to this. I didn't have, I grew up as a religious person in sort of a quasi-secular. Half of my community was Christian, and half of it was just kind of secular. So was kind of grappling as a kid with what it meant to be a religious person, but not Christian. And then also when I was going through the world, growing up, I was just trying to figure out what it meant to be someone who believed in God, as kind of society became increasingly, in my opinion, sort of agnostic or atheistic. So because of that, I ended up studying philosophy, basically because I wanted those tools to think and to talk to people. And I wasn't particularly an academic in it, but I just needed the language to talk to people. And if you ask any of my friends, I love having conversations about philosophy and religion and just ideas. And so that's basically where I'm coming from. And then later on, got a little older, and I was good at taking pictures, so I got into photography and cinematography, and kind of made. That's kind of how I'm making a living now. But I mean, I'm definitely an ideas person, and I love to talk and hear that. I mean, that's part of why I'm attracted to hanging out and talking to you, Wade, is because the ideas are always flowing, and your ideas in particular are outside of the box, which I'm always looking for people who are thinking differently. And I find it kind of rare now. I find it increasingly rare that people are thinking differently, and I find that sort of concerning and almost threatening to me, because I'm always trying to think outside the box, or at least I like to think of myself that way, and everybody does. But so the more kind of homogeneous that people's viewpoints become, the more uncomfortable I am, and so that's kind of been a struggle with the last little few years, I guess.
Well, thank you, Jafar. And indeed, what we see in our society today is an extreme polarization that's been building and growing. And I'm speaking specifically of American society. Full disclosure, I was born in Canada. I'm a naturalized American citizen. I knew from an early age I could never become the president of the United States as a alien-born person, which is why I'm an underachiever in life. But frankly, the American experiment is a litmus test globally for where we're going as a society. That's my perspective. And here in America, we've become increasingly polarized, such that everybody, and in the age of social media and instant memeing, everyone gets labeled into a polarizing camp. And people are looking to quickly assess who and what you are, and in order to, sort of get into that fencing match with you, to know where you're coming from. Are you a friend or a foe? And, then to get out that sword and begin the intellectual fencing match. So coming at it and trying to address the issues with intellectual coherence, and again, from my perspective, spiritual commitment, as a former pastor, as a former minister in a global Christian group, I'm looking for spiritual commitment to follow the divine guidance as it has been given from on high, and an intellectual coherence that doesn't operate in blind faith or ignorance or superstition, but rather is looking to independently investigate the truth in all matters. And that has been a litmus test of how I've proceeded through life as I've grown. So yeah, it is outside the box, but because I don't want to be put in any box, I want to be free and able to explore intellectually and discover the truth. And what I hear you saying is increasingly that's difficult in American society, to the degree that anyone who thinks independently feels threatened. So tell us a little bit more about that, especially as a filmmaker, because you're going around America observing, right? Recording and observing, and you do engage with your subjects, as I know and understand. You seek to, come at it from perhaps a point of view in order to get them to talk and share. But you're essentially an observer and a documenter. So what is it that you're seeing out there in terms of this polarization that you mentioned? And you didn't use that word. I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
I think. I mean, if Daniel were here, I think he would agree that, having studied philosophy, I mean, well, as far as being a filmmaker, when I'm interviewing people, it's mainly documentary films. So I'm interviewing people, and I've lost the sense of, I can. I don't know if I should tell you a story or not. I've had to zip my mouth, right? Like, I don't ask I don't talk as much. I don't engage as much with people, and if I do it, I'm very careful. Because in your normal day-to-day life, you know your friends and you know what they expect, you know what they believe, but it's not always the case when you meet strangers, and I meet a lot of strangers, that you know what they believe or what their comfort zones are. So now, like 10 years ago, I felt like I could say anything to anyone, within reason. But now when if I'm out and there's sensitive topics, I don't really share the thoughts that pop into my head, because I'm just not sure how they're going to react to it, and I don't. There's not a sense of trust basically anymore. I know that sounds kind of odd, but I don't want to offend anybody basically. So I've done it. In fact, I've offended people by asking simple questions because they weren't politically correct, and I've had clients tell me that it was really inappropriate and chastise me, and not threaten me, but I've gotten sort of in trouble, and I didn't. So there's stuff like that has happened, and so I've had to kind of readjust the way I interact with that work environment. Now, when it comes to my friends, it's a little different because I'm going to require more of them and to speak more freely. But those conversations, I've learned that there's just certain conversations I can't have with even my friends anymore, and so that it's restricting. You feel like you're being choked, sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and there are people experiencing this. People experience this historically, right? In the origins of our nation, which we'll get to in a moment. Indeed, our nation was there. There is a so-called original sin of our nation, in that our Constitution declared that all men were created equal. But in fact, our Constitution, the way it was applied, actually enshrined the notion that not all men were not created equal right from the start. And in particular, there were racial, exclusions. Not to mention the horror of chattel slavery, right? So that's like the original sin of this nation. So throughout the history of this nation, there have been groups who were silenced and more and worse, right? And I actually, for a brief period of time, taught 4th and 5th grade out in California as I was transitioning from becoming a minister to what I did later. And the social studies curriculum at that time in the mid 90s to late 90s in California was basically a series of discussions of how white males had oppressed every imaginable group of people, whether it was the Hispanic people from Central and South America, whom we stole the land from. Well, before that even, it was the native and indigenous peoples whom we stole the land from, and broke treaties with. And then it was the Hispanic peoples whom we stole the land from and broke treaties with. And then it was, African Americans whom we enslaved. And then it was women who didn't have the vote. And then it was the Chinese who we conscripted to build the railroads. And then it was the Japanese who we interred during World War II. And I was open to all of these discussions, but my contention was World War II in particular was absolutely not about us interring Japanese, right? That is not what World War II was about. So unless we're teaching our children the global facts around World War II, we're actually creating this very wrong, skewed view in generations of children. Correcting the errors of history is one thing. Creating a new fabricated history is another, right? So yes, this nation was founded in this original sin of slavery, and you might even say white supremacy, because the founding fathers were all white men and they were landowners. Now I'm going to tie it back in real briefly, and I encourage everyone to go listen to the podcast where we talked about the economic model of ancient Israel, in which God apportioned the land to all the families, as the story goes. The land was apportioned to all the families in perpetuity. So a land grant, and there is evidence in the Bible of legal real estate transactions going way back to Abraham, and where purchases of land were made and documented with legally binding real estate descriptions, which have been proven through archaeology to be normal legal approaches in the time, where land was legitimately purchased from the owners under Abraham and even subsequent people. And then that this land was then apportioned to the families in perpetuity, and an economic system was built up around that, so that the nation of ancient Israel was in fact one that was based on land ownership that was evenly partitioned out to all the families, all the participants. And yes, it was a patriarchy, but it was through the males. But Moses then clarified that yes, this land could be inherited by women and daughters in the event that there was no male, right? So going back thousands of years, these issues about equity and fairness across the sexes of male, female, and also across peoples were actually dealt with in an incredibly advanced way in the biblical record, way beyond the times. So anachronistic thinking of going back and judging them by our modern standards is completely and utterly unfair if one does not take into account that they were way, way more advanced in the record of the Bible than peoples all around the world who lived subsequent to that by thousands of years. And so, yes, indeed, there was this original sin in the United States of America, but then this was the source of the major contention of our nation in the Civil War, in which these issues were dealt with in a way that was very, very painful to this nation. And we are a nation that progresses in fairness and equity. Everyone would have to agree that the American experiment is one that progresses in fairness and equity. It may be not fast enough for all peoples at all times. It may be legitimately viewed as 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But the founding fathers created an experiment, again, that was very advanced in terms of what was going on anywhere else on this planet. And we can quibble about, France versus America and what came first and what was better, but we were moving in that direction. Go ahead, Jafar.
Well, that's the problem. You can always argue about statements like that, right? Like that's the issue. When you say that we're always going forward, it's just hard to make it not an opinion. I mean, it's not actually. There's people who do research and they have metrics on it, and you can actually find out objectively. Like it's actually. But most people don't operate, in a day-to-day situation. When I'm out working or in the street, most people, we don't have access to that information. It's actually a problem I was thinking about a little bit earlier. Like most of us, this is a good point. I think we don't have access to most of the information that we need in order to have an argument on that level. If somebody's opposing
I
us,
disagree
right?
that we don't have access to it. I would agree that
right.
We're not accessing it. It's there. In the modern age, it is there. You can find it. Anybody, in America with a computer or a phone can access the information. Of course, their circumstances, socioeconomic and whatnot, may be that they don't have the time, focus, energy, or interest, but the information is available.
Yeah. But most of the conversations that people are getting into now that are causing the polarization that you're talking about, the content of those conversations aren't, we're not accessing that information, right? And then that's
right. But that's a choice. My point is, it's a choice,
right.
and that choice may be constrained, may be difficult. There are all kinds of reasons and excuses why that choice is not being made.
Right.
But it is a choice, not. The between black and white, there's a lot of gray in the area of who is and who isn't a victim, who does and does not control their destiny, right? If we go back and read Man's Search for Meaning, I'm having a brain freeze in my old age about the author, a book I've read a couple of times. Search for Meaning, where he goes deep into explaining how even in the Holocaust, those in the concentration camps had a choice to derive meaning from their experiences. And those that survived that most extreme of human suffering, those who chose to seek meaning from their pain and their experience, are those who survive. Viktor Frankl. That is the premise of his book, Man's Search for Meaning. In the meantime, let me just post a comment here that from Sandra that addresses this. Go ahead and read it, Jafar, and we can talk about it.
You can access it, but it's also difficult for most people to know what to look for and to differentiate truth from opinion. The wealth of information is overwhelming, and we aren't taught how to sift.
What's your thought on that comment? Which is, thank you, Sandra, brilliant comment, in my opinion. But what would you say?
I think that's a good point. We're not even encouraged to sift right now. Like, it's just not in the. I don't know what they're teaching kids now, but there's not this urge to go out and find the truth. It's the opposite. From what I've seen, just in popular media and just like in my conversations with people, the facts aren't. It's not about that.
Well, throughout human history, and I've shared in my past episodes here, an experience in Soviet Russia under Gorbachev, where when he was abducted and I was in Leningrad, and my experience meeting with these young intellectuals in Leningrad, that this epiphany came that everybody across the planet believes they're right. No matter how ludicrous their position, and I'm not picking on those men, we all, no matter how ludicrous our position, we have consciously adopted that position, whether it's based on fact, truth, myth, superstition, science. We adopt a position. Why? Because we believe it is right. And the tendency of human beings is to adopt a position of moral superiority and sit in judgment of people who have a different opinion, because since I'm right, they obviously must be wrong. And I'm here to school them, to teach them to believe like I believe because I'm right. And so this idea of independent investigation of the truth and being taught how to sift, it's really critical. As Sandra points out.
I watched your previous show with Daniel last week on 1.75 speed right before this, but you guys, I feel like you guys got into got into this topic of why do we need a group? Like he was saying, his principles or beliefs sort of emerged. I don't remember exactly how he put it, but they were emerging naturally, and you didn't need to, name it. You didn't need to create this group identity and then become a part of it. And I think you had some. I don't remember if you went into response to that, so my point is that we do have groups, and for some reason we need them. And I'm sure someone gave a good example there. But once we have these groups, and this is something that I've been thinking about, and everyone thinks that they're right. You have your set of principles, you get attached to them, you go out and you try to promote them, which is fine. Like, as long as we're all following the rules, as long as we're following the rules of what groups, that we should all be playing by the same rules, and then we can vie with each other to be the best group, right? It's just like you do in school with any team. But if we start to break rules, of course, that gets complicated. But what are the rules of the game then, if we're all going to be in these groups? And the thing is that everyone is in a group, whether they say they are or not. And it's something I learned from David Foster Wallace. He said that, everybody worships. It's not about whether or not you worship, it's what you worship. And then he went on to say, if you worship money and sex and power, then those things are going to eat you alive and destroy you by the end of your life. But if you worship like these inviolable principles, like these beautiful principles of life and spiritual things, whatever you want to call them, then at least you'll have something that doesn't go away after you get a little older, or the stock market crashes. So then, how do all these groups work together? What are the rules to that?
Yeah. So let me quote a source of wisdom, Bill Watterson, who is the author of Calvin and Hobbes, and Calvin's inimitable Calvin Ball, right, in which he makes up the rules as he goes, right? So I love that you've gone to that topic, because what I see going on in our society today, and I've talked about this in past incarnations of my work, in which, to me, the scientific, if you will, analysis of hypocrisy kind of lies at the heart and core of what I do when I try to independently investigate the truth. Because as a former minister, I wrestled with, at a deep spiritual soul level, the issue of hypocrisy, right? Because I was the example, and people came to me for spiritual guidance, and in a context of hypocrisy, right? Many people believe religionists are hypocritical because it's easy to see their hypocrisy because they are blatant about their bias, right? They wear their bias on their sleeve. And whenever they don't live up to their professions of faith, they can easily be hypocrites, right? So what I began to see on my spiritual journey was that what you profess is meaningless. What you do matters. You can profess whatever you want. Profess your faith in Jesus. Profess your faith in Jesus as your Savior. Completely meaningless when your actions prove that you do not actually have faith in Jesus as your Savior, right? So this idea of hypocrisy, and so scientifically looking at that, there are two forms of hypocrisy that I sort of crystallize out for my own benefit, which are double standards or false equivalencies. And what we see going on in this nation, here's the point, is we have enshrined hypocrisy as a national standard. This polarization. People are intent on virtue signaling. So rather than sifting information to arrive at the truth of the matter, people are being taught to establish moral superiority for their position by signaling their virtue, by establishing their moral superiority on any topic, so that they do not have to sift. They do not have to address the issues. Why? Because the issues are actually complex. They cannot instantly be solved by proclamations and professions of belief or moral standards. We're at a point in human history where we're beginning to read the second book of Revelation, which is the creation itself, right? The Creator has given us creation, and that is the Creator's greatest revelation. And we are emerging now in our ability to read that book of Revelation. And those issues are complex and science is needed. So double standards and false equivalencies. Double standard is two things that are the same being treated different. False equivalency, two things that are different that are being treated the same. This is the cutting edge of judgment today. Not sitting in judgment, but as Jesus said, judging rightly. So my point, we must look at hypocrisy, but at a national discourse level, hypocrisy has been enshrined. People stand up at the top levels of government and academia and whatever passes for authority today, and they pronounce their moral superiority while not practicing this sifting, and while teaching people not to practice this sifting that Sandra mentioned. I'll stop there, Jafar, and let you react to all that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, to some extent, like you can only look at yourself. Like, because I'm a hypocrite. I do things that are hypocritical. I'm not trying to be, so I have myself to work on, and it's not that, and I think we should be aware of hypocrisy outside of us, right? Especially if we're.
Let me clarify for you
for
and
it.
for the audience. I am not addressing the hypocrisy of any individual.
Mm-hmm.
I am not seeking to sit in judgment of anyone being a hypocrite. This is why I said it has become enshrined in our institutions. The political parties, the institutions of higher learning are now practicing hypocrisy as a whole to a degree that exceeds the past, in that it is becoming systemic in everything that we see and do. And with the acceleration of information in social media, and memes, these virtue signaling ideas become crystallized almost instantaneously, and people can then adopt them in a current moment in time to achieve moral superiority.
Well, so this goes to a thought I have on maturity, because the world is different now than it was, 150, 200,000, 2,000 years ago, and we have, it's just different. So it's becoming, the responsibility to sift is becoming, each individual is becoming responsible to sift. Not only, it's almost a duty to sift the information you're getting from the people who are giving the information to you. And if you don't do that, I feel like you're being neglectful, because I mean, it's always been that way, but now I feel like it's, if we don't do it, it's even more problematic. And it's gonna, and what it does, I think, if we go back to the polarization, if you don't sift information, you're gonna kind of by default get routed into, get kind of shuffled down one of these rabbit holes or whatever into some camp, and you might, you're gonna think you want to be there, but you're not gonna want to be there, like in any of them. So that you kind of have a responsibility to yourself, not only not to be hypocritical for yourself, but to be looking for it and sifting. And I think, there's a lot of people who take pride in saying they're not judgmental of other people. And, like there is a good way not to be judgmental, and there's a bad way not to be judgmental. Like we should be discerning with all the information that comes, and we should be looking at it carefully. We have a responsibility to ourselves and our family and our community to discern the truth. And I think that we've kind of, maybe we're a little lazy. Maybe we're worshiping the gods of money and sex and power too much, and we've given up that responsibility to other people, which is going to come back to haunt us.
True. So we've had Daniel join. He may be having technical difficulties still, but I wanted him to at least be able to hear what we're saying in the dialogue. We've covered a lot of ground, some of it from past episodes, some of it brand new. But I think we're at a good point in our discussion. So having addressed the topic of the information is available in the modern age for people to access and get clarity about historical facts and the current situation, but that people are either distracted, lazy, haven't been taught how to access it, and as Sandra said, they have not been taught how to sift, right? So I want to show one more comment here real quick to sort of wrap up that section, and we lost Daniel again. He may be having technical difficulties. So Sterling said, one level of hypocrisy is when you know better but don't do better on a personal level, right? And the hypocrisy of requiring others to be or do a certain thing even when you don't either, right? This is what we typically understand as hypocrisy. So thanks, A.M. Sterling, for clarifying. That's sort of personal hypocrisy. But I'm talking now about systemic hypocrisy, right? So we have the dialogue around systemic racism in this country, and we've spent many, many decades now making sure that we are progressing in our ability to create laws that do not enshrine hypocrisy. We have had this kind of hypocrisy in laws in the past, where double standards, two human beings being treated differently by law based on something that does not classify them as being different, right? i.e. race, right? So systemic racism would be the enshrining, in my opinion, the enshrining of laws that treat two human beings differently based on a characteristic that does not make them different, such as color, right? But systemic hypocrisy has many forms, not just racial, not just systemic racism, right? And it's in this nation today, we are seeing battle going on in the culture war in the courts around this topic of politicized virtue signaling and people seeking to achieve a result and an outcome based on a hypocritical double standard or false equivalency, right? And Daniel, we've covered a lot of ground here, but we're just about to jump into the article that we've all had a chance to read in preparation for this show today, which is in the American experiment, going back to the founding fathers, who we've already talked, and we got into racism and this because of they were, largely white male landowners who approached the Constitution and its application in complete hypocrisy, because they declared all men to be created equal, but the laws of the country, of the nation that they founded, did not in fact follow that ideal. And this led to a civil war, arguably. I don't want to get into the specific history of that, but this nation, this grand experiment, was structured such that it could and did address those issues and progress over time. Without a doubt, we have progressed away from slavery, right? Away from GMO, and it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and not fast enough and in the right way or the perfect way based on this person's view or that person's view. We've got a long way to go, but we continue to progress. But one area of taking a major step back is in the area of religious freedom, right? So this nation was founded with a certain degree of objectivity that was new and different. It specifically addressed, and in the First Amendment, the freedom of religion, right? Not freedom from religion, right? This is where it's gone to push religion out of society entirely, but rather freedom of religion, the freedom of every individual to choose their religion, and freedom of belief, to believe differently, and that the government cannot and will not enforce conformity of thought on religious beliefs, right? So, Daniel, welcome, and I'm glad you were able to overcome the technology challenges you were clearly having, and to join us. Jafar, who you've met, and I have been, talking generally. I'm going to now share this article and and read a quote from it and jump into this discussion as a trio here. So this is an article by Thomas Farr in the Wall Street Journal from August 11th. So very recent. American diplomacy, according to Thomas Farr, now abandons religious freedom. By pushing faith to the margins, the U.S. undermines its moral leadership abroad. What this article is saying, and again, remember, friends, and please click like and subscribe on Facebook and YouTube if you haven't yet. This show is created in the image of God, exploring the role of religion in society. So this gets to the heart and core, especially as we here in America look at what this nation has done and contributed to the role of religion in society. And Americans, as it says here, have never agreed that one religion is true, and although one view, of course, Christianity. But officially, legally, never agreed that one religion is true and good. But we've accepted the founders' view that all people must have the freedom to exercise religion, and that this freedom is so sacrosanct it deserves special protection in our Constitution. But that consensus has faded. According to the prevailing moral orthodoxy, religious practice not only isn't celebrated, it's increasingly intolerable. Those who affirm traditional beliefs about human life and nature, from abortion to marriage to distinctions between the sexes, are cast dangerous to democracy. Especially troubling is that such calls often come from government, whose duty is to defend religious rights. Take the Equality Act pending in Congress and supported by the Biden administration, which would vastly expand anti-discrimination laws and expressly bar religious exemptions. This effect would be to subject dissenters from secular orthodoxy to ruinous lawsuit. Weakened protections for religious practice at home harm faithful citizens. They gravely affect those abroad. By pushing religion to the margins, we undermine our moral leadership and ability to aid the millions of people, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Yazidis, Baha'is and others who are persecuted for their religious beliefs. So, Jafar, I'm gonna stop sharing here and bring you back on and quickly ask you to address this, because your father is from Iran originally, and your roots are in Iran and Islam on that side of your family. But you today are a Baha'i, which is a religious group that is persecuted in Iran. So, not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. What is your reaction to that? To what role has America played? And by the way, I'm on a delegation to various political leaders, to inform them about the persecution of religious minorities, and in particular to address through various resolutions that are passed by Congress, and get them to sign on and support those resolutions to sanction regimes and governments who are offending this principle and who are persecuting religious minorities, one of them being the Baha'is in Iran. So what is your perspective on America's role in this? Not to, again, out you too much here, but a valuable perspective given your background.
I don't ever think in those terms, and I guess I should. Like, I really deeply value, like, from my heart, the ability for an individual to think and believe independently and clearly, and to express those thoughts and beliefs, and without forceful coercion. And I think that living in the United States, we take that for granted, like, to an extreme degree. We don't understand what that means. And I was born here, but I have stories from my dad and from the history of my religion that are very, very poignant. Like, they're extremely poignant. And so I don't know what else to say about that. It's like very it's very deep for me. And so there's a
Well, let me ask it slightly differently then. If America had not been a beacon for religious freedom historically, and actually an actor on the global stage to support and enforce to some degree, even militarily, the protection of certain freedoms, would the world be different? And you may not have thought of it from that perspective, right?
I mean, that's the whole thing. Like, America sort of led the way on that, and countries, the people in Iran. I don't know when my history is not going to be good, but the people in Iran before all during the 20th century, they looked to the United States as a beacon of freedom. They looked up to it. It was a beautiful, good thing, and they wanted that for their countries, and they still do. They still do. And I think that the thing is that living here, growing up here, we don't get that. Like, we don't understand that point of view, especially now. And the thing is that the United States isn't perfect, and it barraged the world with its democracy in good and bad ways. Like, it's not black and white.
And it's materialism, right? The export of commerce and brands, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and all the Americans just being focused on materialistic goals and wealth, exposing the hypocrisy again,
right,
about their proclaimed vaunted ideals, but then simply wallowing in a sea of materialism that is, detrimental to the planet and society globally as a whole.
Yeah, for sure, we've lost something. We've lost that nobility that the United States has lost, the nobility that it once had, and it's kind of apparent, I guess.
Well, and Daniel, I know that in discussions by email prior to this, you raised a really important point about the excesses of religion and why the reaction against religion, has merit, right? And I don't know if you want to share anything on that or any other topic as you've been listening in here.
I thought Jafar's introduction was really really well articulated, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time uh, on the article myself. I read it, and you know, as a philosopher, I'm reading this, and this particular time, as I was reading this article, I thought to myself, is there anything different about the plea for religious freedoms that characteristically different than in other times in history, right? And you might ask, well, what is the reason for that, right? And I say, well, let's suspend that, but let's just identify that there's a question mark to say, is there anything about the way we raise these concerns that is different than perhaps they were raised before? Okay, and there's a lot of information I can offer on that regard. I mean, um, religious freedoms were sometimes fought and died for, which isn't really within the flavor of my generation, Jafar's generation, and perhaps even Wade's. Although we have wonderful stories of Wade, you know, finding danger on his own, right? So, right, like he's just one of these. He has to live on the edge in some cases. So, my point is that when we look at these and we evaluate these claims, we have to, I think, put it in a context. And that's tough to do as a philosopher, is to contextualize and put things into circumstance. And I seem to want to run two simultaneous programs. Running the program to say, what is the deontological explanation? What does it mean if we extrapolated the rule for everybody at all times for, you know, from now and into the future? Would we?
Right,
Would
which
be,
is a way to get at, you know, dissecting and removing hypocrisy, right? Applying it universally and fairly and accurately to all situations, right? Would you agree?
Well, yeah, but then here comes
Yeah.
the point where you have to look, you know, globally, but you also have to look individually, right? And so let's use your example of the ubiquitous nature of consumerism that's running rampant throughout our society, right? And I agree. I've got an entire media outlet that is trying to change what it means to consume. Okay, so now I want to talk about the delta function.
Which for our listeners is Planksip. Go to planksip.com and the articles you find there will be amazing. Daniel, you're doing great work on that. Sorry to interject.
Thank you for that plug, Wade. But so, anyways, we have a difference between the way the information is necessarily represented in a short term, right? And let's say we can condemn or criticize the United States or the West as it is over the last 100 years because of the consumer products. The byproducts of the products, though, have been a way of life that has been unprecedented for my generation and your generation, and well, we're all roughly in the same generation, but even and for our children, like, you know, just the level of prosperity that I think even Jafar, you know, can attest to, that, you know, a North American lifestyle. I'm in Canada, Wade's in the United States, Jafar's in the United States. This is something that is some of the best conditions in the world. Now, there are exceptions, yes, I get that. And I think that's why you're seeing some mixed sentiment as to maybe there's some sort of emergent different leader surfacing, say, out of Europe or, you know, some other place, right? Now, I know that's very long-winded, but it gives you the context of my point. My next thing was I was thinking about the you know, the nature in which religious freedom is actually criticized. Okay, and so if there's liberals that are trying to make policy, right, rules, that's one thing that's different, right, than, say, for example, if you're being oppressed and you're being thrown in jail or you're being secretly murdered in you know, the middle of the night. There's differences between those two societies, I think, and I think that is worth acknowledging.
Right. So you're referring to certain countries where religious persecution is overt and visceral, right? Versus religion being pushed to the margins of society and your views being discounted or even silenced.
That's one of them, and then the other point, subtly, that I was trying to make is that if you had a way to change public opinion about the value of religion, would we or could we have the conversation in the room, right, and then have it replicate beyond? Because if we've tapped into something that truly is universal, we'd say it would emerge, probably through the dialogue and the truthful exchange of ideas, right? And so when we're looking at this, we say, what is the best way that this could emerge? Probably through us, not to fight a law with a law, not to say that the liberals are making laws, and the best way to combat that is to actually, have conversation about, what actually, and, not legislate against it is what I'm saying. Is it has
Right.
to be normative. It has to be, everybody has to say, yeah, that just makes sense. That's a natural law. Everybody should have dignity. Everybody should have opportunity. Everybody should have a chance at happiness. These kinds of things, right?
Right. Well, but I want to just dig a little deeper into what you said, because I want to make sure I understood it, and if I understood it, I want to make sure that the audience understood it. Are you saying, for example, that in some countries and nations, it is in fact the fact that those are more religious in nature, those societies, that are causing the oppression and the visceral, even murdering and incarcerating and dispossessing others who believe differently in societies where religion is dominant, versus in our society, the one we're talking about here, where in America religion is being pushed to the fringes, but the excesses of that are not even on the same scale of the excesses that are conducted in the name of religion. I mean, is that the point you're making, or am I missing it?
You know what? I wasn't, but I really, you bring up a very good point. And just kind of, even just with that interpretation, right? And I think that fundamentally, as people ask that question or start to think about maybe this problem is religion, right? I don't want to say, like the Four Horsemen or the New Atheists and these, kinds of thinkers. Well, I mean, Christopher Hitchens, who's passed away, God is not great. Like, I literally, let's just wipe the slate clean of religion, then we'd be better off. That's kind of the premise, right?
Right.
Recently, things have kind of surfaced to the contrary of that, because there's a growing, I think, understanding of the values or the utility, the values and utility and wisdom in these structures. Okay, and they bond very tightly to identity, right? So I think the better question, rather than trying to instantly, before you even have a conversation, is you got to define your terms. If you start framing the conversation in that way, it's instantly divisive. It's instantly, there's religion versus. Why does religion have versus anything? Religion, if you cut away the crap, if you cut away the garbage and the dogma, fundamentally it's supposed to be a method for bringing out the good, right? It's supposed to be a way to transmit a better society, and through values that the religious doctrine is advocating for. And in fact, you might find that the program might actually work because of the ritualistic behavior, right? And so there could be a scientific basis for why religion is better for groups to galvanize in, and there it goes back to the natural law. Why do we have it? Why should we be defending religious freedom? Because religious freedom has something that even we in science can't quite explain. Not that it's mystery or anything like that, but it's just a more efficient heuristic to be able to use rather than, an alternative. Which at this point seems to be like some sort of an oppressive boot stamp on your forehead.
Well, and Daniel, one of the reasons I love having you on the show is you've arrived at a similar perspective from a completely different, life experience and direction and approach to that I have, which is, these false dichotomies that lend themselves to polarization and side taking and argument and debate versus consultation and an effort to achieve consensus, right? I've come to that conclusion from a completely different path than you have, but yet you articulate that so well that is in fact what is needed, right? The ability for us to come, and as the Bible says, let us reason together. Yeah, right? That's one of the capacities we've been given, in my opinion, in that book of Genesis that I referred to earlier, is that that divine spirit that allows us to conceive of something different, of something better, and co-create that with other human beings, which is why, you know, Adam was given Eve as a helpmate, as it is explained in the, so that they could co-create literally in the creation of children, but also the society that would develop from them having, you know, the two wings of a bird, right? The male and the female that could together give flight to the human experiment. Jafar,
Yeah. Well, I listened. You know, again, I listened to your guys' talk last week, and one of the questions I had, and also I had the same question in reading this article, is maybe it might be good to start to define what religion is. I know that seems kind of rudimentary, but I think that that's sort of when I mean, I feel like that's what's happening a lot in our culture. Like what religion was has been criticized, right? And rightly so, right? It's been criticized because it was corrupt. It was it did have a dark history. Um, but of course, like we're throwing the baby out with bathwater. But there is that side to it. So when you look at these philosophers that came around, like you know, like Marx and Nietzsche, and then recently Hitchens, and you have Sam Harris and all those guys. Like, I don't see them like as a say a religionist or theist. I don't see them as like enemies. I see them as they're helping clear the path. You know, like clear the ashes away from, and so that the phoenix can rise again. You know, like we're redefining religion. We're figuring it out again, and we're in this chaotic tumultuous storm, right? And you know what we think is our enemy, it might be our friend. What we think is our friend might be our enemy. You know, like this is something we're figuring out. And I think that the redefinition of religion, and especially God, is something that's happening right now. And whether we like it or know it or not, it's being redefined. And so this is why I think the two of you are coming at the same thing from a different perspective. Where that's where that's happening. Like we're actually getting to something real when a person like Daniel and a person like Wade are aiming at the same thing and saying, "Hey, wait, that's close to what I'm saying too." But so I don't find Hitchens and Harris and Nietzsche and Marx as enemies necessarily, as a religionist.
That's very radical, Jafar. Because I mean, I agree with you. I really do. I agree with you. But the extent to which Nietzsche, as a philosopher and thinker, was against religion was, then he was the dynamite for sure. And Hitchens with his book about, but you're right. It's bigger than them, right? It starts
Yep.
to have society as a whole consider, right, in the famously quoted and often misinterpreted "God is dead" by Nietzsche, right? So, but it has us think as a society, maybe, what, really? Maybe it is going away, and maybe we should do something about that.
Well, he said it would be replaced by something, right? Nietzsche said that it would be. He predicted it would be replaced, and he predicted replaced by what power? I don't know. You'll know better than I. But so the most powerful force would replace that authority figure, right? So if God or religion is the most powerful force, then it will come back and replace that. That what was left in our misunderstanding of God. Like we misunderstood, say, God, and so we have to shed that skin and be reborn. As a society, historically over thousands of years, it keeps happening.
I'd like to go ahead and share a comment here from one of our viewers, from Tim Frew, and see what you guys think about that.
I don't disagree with that. See, like I don't disagree with Nietzsche in saying that.
So, go ahead.
I actually don't read Nietzsche. I find him frustrating. So I only touch him No, honestly, I think I'm much more of a Platonic thinker, and I spend more time with Plato. In fact, also Schopenhauer, Kant, um, and lightly touch on other ones. I'm as of
So,
recently started to take another pass at Nietzsche.
why would you, for example, be a reader of Kant and not Nietzsche? Just for our audience, they may
Well,
be familiar with Kant. I don't know.
well, Kant, he was the first philosopher after Rene Descartes that tried to basically re-systematize or, I guess, run philosophy through the German idealistic filter. I would
Right.
probably say, right?
Yep.
And by the time it hit Kant and then went to Schopenhauer and then to Nietzsche, where Nietzsche was taking it, I love him as a poet. He was an incredibly disturbed man and very brilliant, but it just doesn't seem to myelinate and replicate in what naturally emerges for me in some of the more foundational documents. And I think that's where thought leadership comes from, and it might be a nice juxtaposition to what Jafar was saying and what the modern interpretation of a pluralistic ideology is, or pluralistic ideologies. And simply this is, and that would be my MO as, again, the owner and the founder of Planksip. It's to return to the classics and rediscover those classics, and that helps re-engineer, reinvigorate, rebirth the process of wisdom, right? Especially in a Western tradition.
Oh,
Um,
I'm reminded of my freshman year in my undergrad studies, where I was going to get a degree in theology, and I took Latin literature and translation, which was a senior level course. But because I arrived mid-year and arrived late, it was like the only one open to me for the requirement. So I suddenly was thrown in as this really green, vegetating, recovering druggie in Alaska who somehow managed to get into college in this class with Dr. Stavronidis, who is a classically trained philosopher from Greece, Kyriakos
oh wow.
Stavronidis. And
Yeah.
I was given an F in that class and put on academic probation. But he was trying to get and I managed to survive. But he was trying to get the point across that, look, Wade, I appreciate very much your attitude. You seems like you have a great attitude for biblical studies and for applying those teachings in your life. But you need to understand that these great thinkers and these great works have something to teach you, and for you to truly become a better person, you need to embrace these things. This was really a very rude but important awakening for me. And it was very helpful at the time, to sort of a wake-up call for sort of this blind faith and just anyway. But the point is, I
That's
want
brilliant. I love that.
well, and this story is woven in because I have an encounter with Dr. Stavronidis in my senior year where I managed to pull an A out of the biblical scholarship class, and then later when I was a minister in Germany at the conference in Colmar, France, I believe it was, the European ministry, where we were being told to begin adopting the Trinity, which we did not accept. I successfully used Dr. Stavronidis' methods of logic and so forth that I had been taught by him to pretty much argue him to a standstill on this topic. But my point is, and and of course I document my heroic effort in my first book, The People of the Sign, and it's hopefully quite entertaining reading as well as getting people to learn something. But my point is, again, getting back to these classics, where I approach this topic is my theological background is of kind of a reverse messianic Jew, in which we as Christians were going back into the old the Hebrew scriptures, back into the Hebrew scriptures, the Hebrew Bible, and studying Moses and finding out who Jesus really was, where his roots were as a living human being, living as a Jew, and according to the Jewish religion, while contesting the dogma of it, right? And so, to that point about the corruption of religion that you were making, Jafar. I mean, decades of my life were spent in the Bible trying to understand what was true from the revelation that was recorded versus the religious edifices that had been built on that and the corruption that had seeped in. And so, again, that idealistic neophyte, right, who flunked Latin literature and translation was undertaking this project for decades of going to the original writings. And as Jesus said, 7 times, from the beginning it was not so. And then he taught this is what was true from the foundation of the world, which is why I spend so much time in the book of Genesis, getting back to the original intent, right? Now, and to put a bow on this, the founding fathers of the American Constitution, we talked about this a few episodes ago, are being criticized because who cares what their original intent was, because they were racist, white, supremacist landlords, right? So who cares what their original intent was? Well, we should go back and study. We should, as Sandra said earlier in the program, learn how to sift, right? And Daniel, I think you would agree that in terms of the Platonic dialogues, right? Learn how to sift, learn how to discern the truth. And that's the purpose and point of this show. And I'm so grateful to you two for being here today to have this dialogue and to teach us here in this room and anyone listening in how to sift. Thank you, Sandra, for bringing up that point. We'll continue to do that in this show week after week. Learn how to sift, learn how to discern, learn how to listen to somebody else's perspective and understand their intent versus virtue signaling our moral superiority from whatever perspective that might come from. Those are my closing comments, but Jafar, Daniel, I'll give each of you the opportunity, because this time has flown by and we're over time, but I'll give each of you the opportunity to share your closing thoughts on today's program.
I'll just say that when I read the dialogues, I agree, Kant and the dialogues that's the stuff that charmed me the most. And I remember it was like being reborn reading the dialogues when I was young. So, yeah.
Well, I don't want to get into the point because, Wade, I think it's a continuation of the show. I think as you were speaking, I had like 5 or 6 different points I was getting excited about.
We don't have to end. We don't have to end. You can hold forth, you can share, and it might be the jumping off point for next week's show.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, but let me now. So I had mentally made the commitment not to bring those up, and now and I was going to make something a little bit similar. But let's keep going. I'm happy with that. So I think when I want to point out on my YouTube channel, and I'll give you guys a vote. Okay, I can bring up the contentious issue first, or I can bring up the complementary.
Contention. Bring the pain.
Bring the contention, but I do have something sweet that I want to also. So
yes. Don't
let me talk too much about the contentious issue before, or don't respond to the contentious issue until I get to tell you about the.
Yeah, I often feel that. Yeah, I often feel that you don't really have people's attention. I mean, and this is just my personality, but I like to hit somebody upside the head with a 2x4 to get their attention, actually listening to what I have to say. So then everyone stay tuned, don't get offended, bring up that contentious point, and then we'll listen to, what else you have to say.
Okay, so the contentious point is that on my YouTube channel, I have a YouTube series called The Myth of Jesus. Okay? And The Myth of Jesus was starring David Fitzgerald. He's an outspoken atheist, and he's a mythicist. So having him in the room and really starting to contemplate if the man, the physical form of Jesus, never did exist, what is the essence of Jesus? And do we actually lose that essence if he never existed? That is the interesting philosophical question that I think would unite.
I don't find that contentious. I love that. But then I love thought experiments. So I can detach from whatever personal beliefs and go with the thought experiment. So thank you. I think that is a great and interesting and valid point. Some listeners might find it contentious, but it's not being presented in the spirit of contention. I know, Daniel.
Yeah,
right?
but we get the click results for it because it's in the YouTube channel,
Right.
and by far it's huge because it's like
Right.
big letters, the myth of Jesus,
Right.
and it's like so it's a little bit key, right? To
Yeah.
people want to click on it. The other one that doesn't perform near as well, maybe Jafar would really like this one. I've put up the dialogues on YouTube in Audible form, right? And the project that I'm working on right now, I'm starting with Euthydemus, is that I'm going and I'm putting all the timestamp and equivalent Stephanus numbers, right? So because when you cite something, if you say, 242D to, whatever, and you should properly cite it with the Stephanus numbers. And anyway, so I have this like enormous project in my head to go in and timestamp it and then put it in the notes with links in it and stuff. So talk about a labor of love, hey? Right? Like I don't know how many hours it's already taken, and I'm thinking, okay, 34 more dialogues to go.
Well, I do want to make one comment on the whole myth of Jesus thing, because this is an interesting prophecy, because one of the prophecies about Jesus is that he would return and that all knees would bow, right? Well, he was crucified, right? And again, if he was real, right? He was crucified, and the effort was made to stomp out his religion, right? But in the end, all the kings of large swaths of the planet bowed their knee to him in order to accept their coronation. Literally, right? So in that sense, he was resurrected. He was objectively resurrected, and he did objectively return already, because the knees bowed to him. Kings bowed to him, and all their subjects bowed to the kings who were coronated in the name of Jesus, right? So certainly myths can be larger than life, and Jesus, was beyond larger than life. It's an interesting thought experiment that can allow one to view the Bible, which I believe is the revelation of God, and believe that it is trustworthy, allow us to view in a new light. And that's the beauty of these kinds of discussions, and being willing to not, get your reptilian brainstem all up in fight-flight mode, but rather allow your cerebral cortex to engage in the discussion with the perspective of another human being who, to Jafar's point, is not your enemy, but is your friend, because they're challenging your beliefs. But in a nation built on that principle, we must defend the right to hold those beliefs in order to be able to have that come about.
Well, that's why I like reading scripture so much. I remember one time reading the book of Esther with my son. I don't know if I talked about this on the show or if it was our previous engagement, but the book of Esther is in the Hebrew Bible, and I think it's a relatively short book, but it's actually a comedy, and I'm not sure if you knew that, but...
Well, it's hilarious. Haman and his comeuppance, and yeah, it is. And it's the irony, right?
Yeah, well, I think the important thing to point out was that at that point I'd actually been doing a YouTube series with an Orthodox Jew, and I had asked him about this, and he in his it was ignorance, but it was I don't mean it to be offensive to say that, he just didn't know that from a theatrical standpoint or a theater standpoint,
right,
a comedy and a tragedy are so he had the interpretation. His mind was thinking of it's funny, like it's a comedy on a sitcom, right? That's what he thought, right. And I really like what you said is that, okay, well then let's look at these texts and try and look at them in a new light, right? So basically, I hope that I imparted some wisdom with him to say comedy is actually a way for us to challenge authority. And the story was that the Jewish people were under a tyranny, a different governing rule, king, and that king was making a whole bunch of mistakes. They knew that, and it was a bit of a kind of a comedy of errors that was going on. And the deep Jewish wisdom taught, and through this story said, hey, you know what? They're going to get theirs. They're going to understand that what they're doing today over the long run is just not a good idea, basically. And I think that really simplifies and characterizes what the Jewish wisdom does for us in a culture, is that the Jewish and Old Testament wisdom, what they look at it is in long cycles, right?
Thank you.
And I think that.
And this is what I was trying to say actually before you joined, when we were looking at American history, and I made the comment that it does progress, right? And it's an objectively valid progression. But you have to take the long view, because it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And if you take a segment of it, you would make the argument that we are moving backward. And people do this disingenuously, right? I believe that some of the people are smart enough to know exactly what they're doing. But again, this gets back to that moral superiority rather than seeking a dialogue.
And power, though. But Wade, it's also
Absolutely.
power.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, if there's confusion and uncertainty, who runs to the carcass? It's the vultures. And if the vultures are the ones, what are they? They want power. That's what they're feeding off of. And so in some regard, you look at it and say, well, at what point do we retain or take away the power if the Christian fundamentals are actually being stripped away? And that's the interesting thing to say. Well, when's enough? When do we go to the shed and get the pitchforks?
Well, I was talking to some people earlier today. One biblical example that comes to mind is the example of Samson. Samson in the Bible, right? This was a prophet who was, somewhat rebellious. These are interesting prophets in the Hebrew Bible. Samson and Balaam, prophets who were declared to be prophets, and Samson was a Nazarene, right? Not a Nazarite. Jesus was a Nazarite, which is somebody from Nazareth, but a Nazarene. Or maybe I'm getting them backwards anyway. Sorry, I haven't really looked at this. But anyway, they're confused, but they're completely different. So Samson took the Nazarene vow, where he let his hair grow and he didn't drink alcohol, and it was his hair that gave him the strength, because he was conforming to this one law. But in his life, he was a hypocrite, right? He was a whoremongerer. He was, disobedient to his father. He was impulsive. He used his strength in bad ways. But in the end, after he was stripped of his power and strapped to a mill where he had to grind, grain like an ox, he was given an opportunity to redeem himself, and the way he redeemed himself was to pull down the pillars and take with him most of the leadership of the Philistines with him, as he, destroyed himself in his last, one, as Bob Dylan would say, one good, from, one of my favorite songs by him, he's looking for a way to do one good deed before he died. Well, Samson is a tragic hero, but symbolizes how, Israel went on from there. And the ultimate story of ancient Israel is a redemptive one in which the people are redeemed, right? Whether that be through Jesus or through the subsequent reestablishment of the people of Israel and the Jewish people, right? My point is, at a moment in time, right, things look really bad, things look ugly, but take the broad view of history, and as people like to say about the Bible, look to the back of the book and we win. But the thing about we is it's not us versus them. It's we as a species, and God sits above all outside of time and space, and he redeems all human beings, our entire species. No one is excluded, right? Mm-hmm. And again, to bring a point on this, the American experiment and the enshrining in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, this freedom of belief to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and we might also say the pursuit of our purpose and our meaning and the fulfillment of whatever it is that the Creator has ordained for us without the interference of some political entity that seeks to dominate and control us. While we're told throughout the writings of every religion that we must submit to the authority and work within it, it's a very interesting thing to truly understand what true religion is really all about.
Where are you at, Jafar? What are you thinking about?
Uh, well, yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts, but the one that keeps popping up is when we were back on the Jesus was a myth bit. Like I'm not offended by that. Well, I mean, I think there are things that someone could say that would offend me, but it goes back to like what is real. Like I kind of it might not matter. Like if all the kings of the earth bowed, and they did to the name, does it to some degree does it matter whether he actually walked around or not? Like he was more real than most of the people that were living at his time based on the effects of his names or just someone wrote a story. Like that story was more real than almost anything that has ever existed in human culture, right? It's probably the most real book that has ever been written. And so we can kind of we can just like we're reconsidering the definition of God and religion, we are also reconsidering and redefining reality, and not just philosophically, but we're actually doing it physically and socially, like modern physics. So so then the next step towards that is like how okay so if we redefine reality, then like the blind man and the elephant, what becomes the most efficient epistemology by which we can navigate an infinite universe. Right? There's an infinite amount of information just in the room that I'm in right now. I'm just focusing on a very narrow spectrum of it, right? So we've got this infinite information. What's the best way to deal with it? Well, certainly the worst way is to barricade ourselves inside of factions and camps and polarized groups and close our ears to what everybody else has to say, right? So the only way that we're going to figure it out is if we listen to as many people as we possibly can, and preferably as different people as we can, because they're going to be the source of the most potent information that we can get. Like the perspectives that are the most different are going to inform us the quickest and the most the best, right? So then you have this. So then you have America that was this plural, religiously plural country that prospered because of it. And you had Spain when the Moors and the troubadours were coming up and they were setting up universities and they were all studying together, and that was a boon of civilization. So anytime a group of people came together with differences, very different, and they came together and they learned, that was when society progressed, right? That was the time. So this is the antidote towards what you guys were talking about, like the vultures, right? The antidote is that different people come together and share their differences and find and basically unite. But we're now what we're doing is we're creating factions, right? So it's the inverse of what we should be doing. And the more people that come together, I mean, yeah, that's basically what I was thinking.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think I tried to take it one step further. I mean, agreeing with absolutely everything that Jafar said. I mean, there's some, if I was writing a philosophical book of all the points that he just made, there's some gaps to fill in, right? Jafar, you probably understand that there's, for brevity's sake, you had to kind of cover a lot of ground with that, with that, right? But, it does make a lot of sense, and I know that I arrived at one of the same conclusions with trying to change, or I would say like have a marketplace of ideas, right? So how do you come at this again from another way and say we see something perverse in the consumptive reality that is propping us up, right? And say, well, okay, now that we recognize that, that's fine. We know that. What do we do about it? Well, we say it's wrong and this and that. That's fine. But is somebody virtue signaling only if that's what they do? Well, okay, then offer a solution to that.
Right. Right.
And I tend to say, rather than revolutionize it, to say we've got incredible like delivery mechanisms within society, and say, well, maybe we can change social media. Maybe we can change how we get that biochemical feeling of consumption. You know, like change that, and that's what Planksip as a media outlet was trying to do. Is trying to say you can get the same satisfaction by sitting down and going through the Platonic dialogues, or making notes and writing a new book, or coming up with a novel. And it brings me my next point, Wade, because I wanted to talk about your book, and a book that I'm working on. I don't know if the author process is the same for you, but I sometimes jump around, right? So I kind of have the flow of one particular book in mind, and I was driving home today, in fact, when I looked at a street where I'm from, and there's the sign, the street sign says Hegel Street, right? Hegel Street. And so, it's like kind of, God's gently teasing me, right? He's like, let's just plug up, right? So at least he has something to distract himself as he's actually making his way home to be late for Wade's show again. So anyway, so look at the street that says Hegel Street. And it was, unfortunately, it was to the right. I had to turn to the right. But that's kind of ironic, right? Isn't it? Because it's like right, and, he's, kind of quintessentially left. But I was like, fuck, it doesn't matter. As I come at it from the other side, there he is, there he is on the left.
Yeah, that's all a matter of perspective, right?
Yeah, exactly. So regardless, he's, he's only partially right. So anyway, so he's in this thing, and it looks like he's down in this gully. And I'm like, this road is like nice road. And then the Hegel Street's kind of like down into this ditch. And I immediately thought of my good friend Wade, right? And so I got to get this quote right, because it was like a season or two, or an episode ago, we say, jumping from ditch to ditch. Remember, you said that. You said it a few times. It's quote-worthable. It's
quote-worthy. We lurch forward from ditch to ditch. That's the quote.
Yes. Now, is that yours? Can I put, in the top of the book?
I did not hear it from anybody else. George Harrison, was sued over My Sweet Lord, right? And he's so fine because he apparently didn't realize that he was cribbing from the Shirelles when he wrote My Sweet Lord, but I don't believe that I ever heard anybody else say, we lurch from ditch to ditch. That's a Wadeism.
Yeah, that's a Wadeism. Okay, yes. Okay, well, so I want to put that, in something I was writing, and I thought, okay, but the piece was already written. It's like you find the perfect title afterwards, or you find something else that you want to put in that maybe
slouching toward Bethlehem, right? That's Yeats, but lurching forward from ditch to ditch, that's Fransson.
Right. Yeah, and the funny thing is that I find it so situating that it happened at the moment when I was thinking of Hegel in a ditch and his cyclical historical,
Well, and quite literally, as some people know from my first book, there was a high-speed pursuit where I ran off the road at 120 miles an hour. Well, probably it was only going 100 by the time I actually ran off the road with the state troopers in hot pursuit, and ended up flying over an embankment into a ditch, right? And that was a turning point in my life. From there I then did, veer radically into the other ditch. That was a completely lawless, rebellious, nihilistic approach, and then I veered wildly into a fundamentalist, dogmatic ditch for several decades. So yeah, we do lurch forward from ditch to ditch. I'll stand by that quote.
What about you, Jafar? Have you been in the ditch as far as Wade has?
Yep.
Good for you. But I want to paint the picture though for the listeners, and this was another aha moment. I mean, I think about arete and excellence. I think about that, quite often, because it's fundamentally the convergence towards God, right? To use one of your words, that we seem to all kind of gravitate towards this goodness, right, in and of itself, and.
Or the light, simply to the light. The tree puts its roots into the dirty soil and strives for the light.
Yeah, I mean, now, and I can say it as a metaphor, and you can say metaphor is more material than I say it's material, and that's the only point of difference there, right? It's the only point of difference, and regardless, we can say that that kind of thinking manifests something real into the world, and we can all agree that doing good deeds and helping and makes for a better social species, and so it's like maybe there's something there after all, right?
Absolutely. Well, Daniel, Jafar, thank you so much. Materialistically, I'm kind of at my limit, and I could go on and on after a break to get some dinner, but but this may be a good time to end it for everybody as well. We can also hang out a little bit and wrap up. But thank you to everyone for tuning in to Created in the Image of God, exploring the role of religion in society with Jafar Falahi and Daniel Sanderson. And I'm host Wade Fransson. We look forward to seeing you all here next week. Same time, same place, 7 o'clock Central Time, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Daniel, it's like 5 p.m. your time out on the West Coast. And we'll be bringing you more discussion on this topic next week. Please do click like and subscribe so you get those notifications.